It's now my pleasure to introduce Sean Strickland, Director of Business Development and Industry Relations at Pomerleau, who is the sponsor of today's luncheon keynote address. Sean, you're in the room, so please step up to the podium.
Thank you very much, Mark. On behalf of Pomerleau, one of Canada's fastest growing civil buildings and P3 contractors, it's my pleasure to introduce one of our keynote speakers this afternoon, Dan Doctoroff. He is the CEO of Sidewalk Labs, an urban innovation company he launched with Google to improve cities for residents, businesses, and city governments. Prior to founding Sidewalk, he was president and CEO of Bloomberg LP. Dan previously served as deputy mayor for economic development and rebuilding for the city of New York. With Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg, Dan led the city's dramatic economic resurgence, spearheading the effort to reverse New York's fiscal crisis after 9/11. He did this through a 5-borough economic point plan designed to create the first environmentally sustainable 21st century city, known as Plan YC. Dan will be taking questions from the audience using the conference app at the end of his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dan Doctoroff as a keynote speaker.
That should be on the other side. There we go. Thank you. Well, it is great to be here, and thank you, Sean, for that very nice introduction. Congratulations, Bert, on what I have been hearing is an incredibly well-deserved honor. And congratulations to the Council on 25 years of outstanding work, bringing together government and the private sector to meaningfully improve the lives of Canadians. I can't tell you how grateful I am to have the opportunity to speak to you today. As you heard from Sean, my background is actually one that spans both the public sector and the private sector. After a career in finance, as you heard, I was asked by Mike Bloomberg, as he took office in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, to become New York City's deputy mayor for economic development and rebuilding. I spent 6 years helping to bring about the dramatic economic recovery in every corner of the city. Upon leaving City Hall, I became CEO of Bloomberg LP, and I'm incredibly proud to say that we substantially expanded Bloomberg's Toronto presence during my tenure. Although I must confess that at the time, I had no idea what was in store for me in Toronto. 2 years ago, I formed Sidewalk Labs in partnership with Google. We shared the belief that technology, at this particular moment in history, and I know you've heard a little bit about this over the course of the last 2 days, could help address urban challenges and improve quality of life for all people in cities. And our work over these last 2 years has led us to conclude that it is possible to accelerate urban innovation by creating a new type of place where cutting-edge technology and people-first design are built into the very foundation of the urban environment. We looked all over the world, for the perfect place to bring this vision to life. And as you probably know, we found it here in Toronto. I must say, if Amazon sees what we see in Toronto, it won't even be a close call. 3 weeks ago, Sidewalk Labs announced a new partnership with the tri-government agency, Waterfront Toronto, to plan this city of the future on Toronto's eastern waterfront. We're calling this extraordinary endeavor Sidewalk Toronto. And it's only possible when you combine the experience and community trust that Waterfront Toronto, which is now led by my friend and partner in this endeavor, Will Fleissig, has established over 15 years of forward-looking inclusive development, combined with the unique capability of Sidewalk Labs to bridge the divide, the single biggest barrier to doing what we'd like to do between urbanists and technologies. But when you bring that together, when you reach out to the community, to the elected officials, when you capture the energy of this community and the people in this room, you have the potential to do something that no one has ever done before. I'm happy to take questions about what we might do here, but I want to spend the bulk of my time today on the challenges facing cities around the world and how the public and private sectors can come together to help solve them. Toronto, as you know well, faces some great challenges, from traffic congestion to housing affordability to finding access to opportunity for all Torontonians, and has limited resources in the public sector to tackle all of them. Toronto City Manager Peter Wallace spoke about this tension just 2 weeks ago in a speech on the budget, talking about the impossibility of broader city building under existing revenue streams and constructs. But really, these are the challenges of growth faced by all world-class cities, and the best of them, the most self-aware of them, are searching for innovative solutions. In thinking about this problem, I commend you to an important new book called The Public Wealth of Cities. The basic idea is that cities... Stepped on my own joke there. The basic idea is that cities globally are sitting on incredible public wealth, whether it's poorly utilized real estate or underperforming utilities. We know that privatization isn't always the answer, and we know that public management often falls short of expectations. The authors of this book propose a third way, public ownership that relies on private sector management to help unlock the value of public assets for the greater good. Now, there's an even more fascinating new book out called Greater Than Ever, New York's Big Comeback, conveniently available on Amazon. Its author tells grippingly, I might add, how New York City unlocked enormous value in new and different ways in the years that I was deputy mayor. I want to share with you some of the ways and places we unlocked value and how the collaboration of government and the private sector was critical to our success. The first way is that we unlocked value out of air. I'll start with the story of the High Line. How many of you have been to New York and actually visited the High Line? Pretty reasonable percentage. Because it's really what can happen when an inspired private sector teams up with a determined and creative public sector. When I became deputy mayor, when Mike Bloomberg became mayor, the High Line was an abandoned freight line that was one court decision from being torn down. There was a community group called the Friends of the High Line that wanted to save the structure. But to do so, every single one of the 38 owners of property under the High Line had to agree. But everybody thought that was impossible because the city was in the middle of a financial freefall. And it was impossible to find the hundreds of millions of dollars in the city budget to save it and turn it into a park. Sounds familiar here. The solution we came up with was to create value out of air. We rezoned the area and created air rights, rights out of air, for the owners of property under the High Line that could be transferred to designated sites in the area around the High Line where we permitted taller residential buildings to be built. As an aside, we didn't rezone the buildings housing hundreds of galleries that had popped up in the neighborhood. The only way that the owners of the receiving sites could build higher was to buy those rights from the High Line property owners. In effect, out of nothing, we created a valuable property right and then created a market into which they could be sold. Sure enough, we got the unanimous vote we needed. Today, the High Line is visited by 8 million people a year. Thousands of housing units have been built. The galleries have been saved, and the High Line has created or drawn 12,000 new jobs to the area. And it serves as a spine of social interaction in a part of town that had been overlooked for decades. We also created value from the future. When I came into office, perhaps the biggest long-term opportunity to expand our economic base was on Manhattan's far west side. The neighborhood was dominated by major rail yards, aging warehouses, open parking lots, and auto body shops. We figured out a way to build on top of the rail yard, but we still had the problem of accessing the neighborhood by subway. The nearest subway station was a half a mile away, and we knew that an extension would cost billions of dollars that our transit authority didn't have. Our solution was to create a system of value capture based on the economic growth and tax revenues that we expected to occur in the future. Because we believed that a new number 7 subway train station would encourage new investment in the area, which in turn could generate new revenues to pay back the cost of infrastructure. The current estimates are that this value capture will not only pay off its interest and principal, but distribute $20 billion to the city over the next 30 years. Best of all, the new number 7 train station gives New Yorkers a convenient, low-cost, sustainable way of reaching the area that doesn't add traffic congestion to the local streets. At the town hall we had here last week with Waterfront Toronto, a member of the community pointed out the need to connect the city with the eastern waterfront through public transit. He's absolutely right. But the challenge, as we knew in New York, is how to pay for it. The third way we created value was with our land. We realized that the city's economy was overly focused on finance and needed to be more diversified to compete. The internet was just starting to have a big impact on so many traditional industries, and we wanted to make sure New York was attractive to digital companies. A centerpiece of our strategy was a competition to bring a top tier applied sciences, and engineering campus to the city. As an incentive for bidders, the city committed to giving the winner a valuable parcel of land on Roosevelt Island, a small island in the East River that had been underutilized for decades. More than a dozen universities applied. The winner of the competition was a joint venture between Cornell University and the Technion in Israel, which proposed to create a new campus called Cornell Tech. Its bid was led by Josh Seirefman, who is now Sidewalk Labs head of development and a driving force behind Sidewalk Toronto. When fully built, and this is phase one, which was just completed, the Cornell Tech campus will be the most environmentally sustainable campus in the world, and also the home to more than 2,000 graduate students and 280 faculty and staff. Cornell Tech will create that critical feedback loop between academia and industry, which will attract talented new workers to the city, new companies, boost the tech ecosystem, and the local economy. We'd like to do something similar here in Toronto, focused on urban innovation. Fourth, we found value on our sidewalks. New York's transition into a more digital economy required us to think about digital inclusivity. Out of 8.6 million New Yorkers, 2.5 million of them do not have access to broadband, putting them on the wrong side of the digital divide that reduces their job and other opportunities. After I left office, the city came up with a plan to bridge this divide at no cost to taxpayers, in fact, generating enormous revenue for the city. They did this by creating value from the public sidewalks, specifically the 7,500 payphones across the city that were becoming obsolete, largely only used by drug dealers, given the rise of cell phones. The solution was turning these payphones into free Wi-Fi kiosks called Link NYC that provide high-speed internet service as well as free calling and local services. The Link program was not only paid for entirely through advertising revenues, but will generate over $1 billion in additional revenue to the city over its first 12 years. Millions of people have already opted in to use Link NYC, which is being managed by Sidewalk's portfolio company, Intersection. The program has since expanded to London and will soon come to Philadelphia. We tried, but did not succeed to unlock value from our streets. Not every attempt to unlock value was a success. One of the Bloomberg administration's most high-profile projects was to implement congestion pricing in Manhattan. Congestion pricing would have addressed a number of challenges facing New York City, challenges that are familiar here in Toronto as well. By charging a congestion fee in busy districts, the plan would have discouraged people from driving, reduced traffic, and helped us protect the planet from vehicle emissions. We estimated that the plan could have generated a dedicated revenue stream of hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars annually to help expand rail and subway service, improve stations, implement bus rapid transit, and other sustainable transit options. In effect, we wanted to leverage the demand for city streets and turn it into city wealth. The state legislature ultimately killed congestion pricing, but I still believe it was a great approach to funding transportation infrastructure And that's why we're seeing it once again gaining attention in New York as the city's subway system falls into disrepair. And then finally, we unlocked value out of the agencies of government. One of the things I'm most proud of during my time in office was our ability to create or preserve affordable housing. Again, when we came into office after 9/11, the big concern was not that people couldn't afford to live in New York, it was that everybody was going to flee the city. Still, I did know one thing. In order to be successful, New York had to grow, and when it did, we would have to find places for people at all income levels to live. But we didn't have any money. To help drive our affordable housing plan, we found new value in a sleepy government agency called the Housing Development Corporation. HDC was basically a city-controlled bank that finances affordable housing. It was clear from even the most simplistic reading of the agency's books that it could be leveraged a lot more to contribute several times more without harming its bond rating. So we quadrupled its annual contribution for our new housing marketplace affordable housing plan. We ended up creating or preserving an unprecedented 165,000 units of affordable housing. It's housing for 500,000 people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to live in those units. That was the largest city-driven program ever completed in the U.S. Entire neighborhoods, this one's in the Bronx, that hadn't seen a market-rate housing unit built in decades are now thriving. Some of these neighborhoods are home to the greatest job growth in the city. Today, the Bloomberg administration often gets criticized for not creating enough affordable housing. In reality, we simply underestimated how quickly the city would grow, which led to a market imbalance for housing. But I still believe that this was a shortcoming of degree, not of intention, and that without our efforts, the problem would be far worse today. Each of these efforts to unlock value could only have been initiated by government. Mike Bloomberg and I were strong believers in the role of government as an instrument of change to improve people's lives. But we also believe that a big part of our job was to do whatever we could to make the private sector work effectively. In effect, to be a helpful partner. No private company could have extended the number 7 line or created the High Line. But government couldn't do it alone. We believe that the goal should not be a government that never intervenes, as some free market extremists would prefer, nor should the goal be a government that crowds out and demonizes the private sector. The model that we used in New York was a well-managed activist government that served as an able partner of the private sector as well as a protector of the common good. We believed that the government should do the minimum necessary to make the market function, but sometimes that's a lot, or even everything. Canada is fortunate to have leadership with a similar approach to the relationship between the public and private sectors, as is Ontario and the City of Toronto. For Sidewalk Labs, this was a big part of what drew us to respond to Waterfront Toronto's call for an innovation and funding partner. Sidewalk Toronto aims to address some of the biggest, toughest problems facing Toronto and cities around the world. We want to create a place that encourages innovation around energy, waste, and other environmental challenges to protect the planet. A place that provides a range of transportation options that are more affordable, safe, and convenient than the private car. A place that embraces adaptable buildings and new construction methods to reduce the cost of housing and other space. A place where public spaces welcome families to enjoy the outdoors day and night, and yes, in all seasons. A place that is enhanced by digital technology and data without giving up the privacy and security that everyone deserves. If we succeed, it will be because we have worked together, public and private sector, side by side, and succeeded to unlock value. Whether that's from the air, from the future, from the land, from the streets and sidewalks, from the power of government, and most important, from the creativity, innovation, and talent of the people and industry of Canada. I could not be more excited to work with you, to work with all of you in the years to come. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
Great, Dan. Thanks. All right. Thank you for a great presentation. Sets the scene. It's a great follow-on from the discussion we had this morning with our infrastructure minister and the mayor of Toronto, both of whom are obviously committed to really building the municipal infrastructure across the country. So we do have questions from the audience. And why don't I read the first one while you begin thinking about an answer, and we'll go from there. What do you see as the biggest challenges as you reimagine the way cities are constructed, planned, and operated?
I would say, in terms of achieving what we think is possible, is that it's resistance to change. And often that's a very good thing. But the biggest source of resistance is we believe we're at this unique moment in history where there's a set of technologies, not unlike the electric grid or the invention and distribution of the automobile or maybe even the steam engine, that are now coming together to, in effect, enable us to truly attack quality of life issues. We believe that with the application of these technologies, we can dramatically reduce the cost of living. We can give time-starved parents time back in their day. We actually can achieve Vision Zero with no traffic fatalities and create a climate-positive community. But the biggest barrier to that at the end of the day is that the two types of people that have to come together, the urbanists who plan cities, build cities, think about cities, and the technologists actually don't speak the same language. What we hope to be is actually that bridge that enables them to actually work together. It's not about the technology. It's ultimately not about the money. It's about, can we come together and find a way to learn from each other in order to bridge that gulf. From the very beginning at Sidewalk Labs, we've tried to create a company that does both. I view myself, like most of you here, as really an urbanist. I think about cities and building them. I've tried to recruit teams of technologists who actually care passionately about cities and believe in them, and urbanists who actually are open to technology. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
Great answer. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time. Stuff happens. We'll have to have you back. But I did want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for your presentation today and to let you know that we'll be making a donation to Habitat for Humanity on your behalf.
Great organization, and thank you very much. Thank you very much.